Hi, I'm Gabriel, and this is Learning English Path. And in this lesson, I'm going to teach you the difference between the words alone, lone, lonely, and lonesome. Loneliness expresses the pain of being alone, and solitude expresses the glory of being alone. That's a quote by Paul Tillich. Now, before we get into this lesson on the differences between all these words, please, if you like this video, give it a like. If you learn something in this video, give it a like so that more English learners can find this video and we can continue to learn together and not alone. And please do subscribe to Learning English Path, because this YouTube channel can really transform your English learning path, right? You can really take your English to the next level finally by walking the path with me and not alone. Okay? Walk together and talk together. Okay, please subscribe. All right. Now, we're going to look at the differences between these words in pairs. Okay? So, firstly, we're going to look at the difference between alone and lonely. Okay? Alone versus lonely. The difference between these two words is that to be alone is a fact and to be lonely is an emotion. So you can say, I am alone and I am lonely, and these mean two completely different things, right? So you can be by yourself in a room and have no one with you, and you will be alone. But you may not necessarily be lonely, because to be lonely is to feel sad and somewhat gloomy about being alone. But the other thing is that you can feel this emotion of being lonely without even being alone. So you can be in a crowd of people and still feel lonely if you feel that you don't have a connection with anyone in the crowd. So you might feel that you don't have a strong relationship with anyone around you, and so you will still feel lonely in that situation, even though you're not alone. Also, you can be alone, completely alone in a room, right, with nobody else there, and not feel lonely. You might feel completely satisfied. You might even be happy that you are alone and that no one's bothering you right now, right? In that situation, you are physically alone, but you're not lonely. And it's interesting where these two words come from, actually. Alone, the word alone, is actually a Middle English word where they put together the two words all one. So alone comes from all one. So it's just you, right? There's not two people, or there are not two things. It's just all one. So it's alone. You are alone. You are all one. And if you think about it, that's not too different from the spiritual idea of feeling at one with the universe, right? So some of the most profound, glorious feelings in the world can be felt when you are alone. And so the word lonely, where does that come from? That comes from the word lone, which we will get to soon, and just adding the ly on the end. Okay? Similar to adding the ly to an adjective and making it an adverb. Although the word lonely is an adjective. All right? And this is where we get the feeling that we call lonely, but we associate that now with a feeling of sadness that we are alone, right? And one more thing about this word alone, it might not be necessarily in a physical sense. So you can say that you are on the adventure of learning English alone, right? If you don't have a partner to study with, maybe you are learning English alone. Or you might say that you live, or you are living your life alone, in the sense of a more long-term sense of the word being alone, right? You are alone in your life, but that doesn't mean you're always physically alone, right? Okay, so you have to keep that in mind. Sometimes we mean it in the physical sense, here and now you are alone, and sometimes we mean it in a more abstract sense of the word alone. And the other thing about this word alone, you can add the word all just before alone if you want to emphasize just how alone you are. So you might say, I am all alone right now. That means there's absolutely nobody around me. I am all alone, okay? It's just for emphasis. And if you say, now this part can be confusing. If you say, for example, I feel all alone, well, a feeling is an emotion, right? So why didn't the person just say, I feel lonely? Why did the person say, I feel all alone, or I feel alone? Is it the same thing? Well, it could be that the person just mixed up what they meant to say, or what it actually means when someone says, I feel alone, or I feel all alone. It doesn't necessarily mean they are lonely, but just that they don't feel like they are receiving any support, or they don't feel that anyone is helping them on their journey of doing something. So you might say, I feel alone in this job. It means no one's really helping me to do my job. I feel alone. It doesn't mean you're feeling lonely. It just means like you feel like no one else is doing it with you. So you feel alone, right? Okay, now let's look at these two words, alone versus lone. Now, these two words are very similar to each other because they are both talking about the fact that one is isolated or separate from others, right? And the main difference is that the word alone comes after the noun, whereas the word lone comes before the noun. Okay, so let's use an example here. Let's start with the word lone. So you might say, there is the lone traveler, meaning the traveler who is alone, right? So if you're talking about a person who is traveling by themselves, you will say the lone traveler. Or if you're using the word alone, you would say the traveler is alone. Okay, so the word lone comes before the word traveler. The word alone comes after the word traveler. And the word lone is more literary. Okay, you're more likely to see this word in books or in classic stories than you are to hear it in a conversation. It's not used in conversation very often, but you may have heard the idiom, the lone wolf, which means someone who likes to do things alone, right, by themselves. You will say that person's a lone wolf. Or you may have heard of the TV show, the American TV show from many years ago, about 50 years ago, called The Lone Ranger, which was a famous Western TV show in America. Okay, and another thing about this word alone, which distinguishes it from the word lone, is that the word alone can also be used as an adverb, right? So they are both adjectives, but the word alone can also be used as an adverb. So you can say, I was all alone, meaning I was by myself, right? That's an adjective. That's using the word alone as an adjective. So how do you use it as an adverb? Well, you can say, I can do this alone. It's helping the verb, right? Helping the verb do. So I can do this alone. Let's look at the difference between using the word alone before the verb and after the verb. So you can say, for example, I alone can write this book. Or, I can write this book alone. And this is using the word alone as an adverb in both situations, but they have different meanings. Okay, so you can say, I alone can write this book. That means that there is no one else who can. No one else but me has the ability to write this particular book. So I alone can write this book. But if you use it after the verb write, if you say, I can write this book alone, that means I can do it without someone else's help. Sure, someone else could help me, but I can do it alone. I don't need your help, right? So there's a big difference between using the adverb alone before the verb and using the adverb alone after the verb. Okay, let's look at the words lonely versus lonesome. Now, these words are very similar, and there's a lot of dispute as to what the difference actually is. But here's a big one. The word lonely is always an adjective. The word lonesome is usually an adjective, but can also be used as a noun. So, for example, how can you use the word lonesome as a noun? You can say, he was all by his lonesome. That means he was all by his lonely self. Okay? He was alone and lonely. He was by himself. So self is the noun there. But you can substitute the word self for lonesome in this case. Say he was all by his lonesome. And the next way to distinguish these two words when they're both being used as an adjective is that Lonesome is when you have, maybe you have a partner, but they're not with you right now. So usually you have a wife, but right now the wife is on holiday somewhere. So you feel lonesome tonight. Okay, you're not used to being alone, and your love, your wife, is somewhere else. So you feel lonesome. But lonely can be used when there's not as much hope, right? Maybe you don't have anyone, so you feel generally lonely. Like, oh, you're lonely and there's no one you feel like you can call. When you're lonesome, you feel like maybe you have the option of calling someone. But when you're lonely, you feel like there's not really anyone you can call anyway. Now, not everyone agrees with this definition, so you might want to do a little bit of research yourself, but this is what a lot of people believe the difference to be. One more big difference is that lonely is just used a lot more often than the word lonesome, okay? Especially in the UK. Lonesome is a little bit more prevalent in America. But the word lonesome in the UK is very rarely used, okay? Now here's a graph to show how much more the word lonely is used than the word lonesome. Okay, and that's through time as well. But even now, the word lonely is used a lot more often than the word lonesome. So you may be walking your learning English path alone, but you do not have to feel lonely on the path, okay? Especially with this channel. And if you check out my website, learningenglishpath.com, I have a lot of resources there for you, and you don't have to walk the path alone. All right? Keep learning, my friend, and keep going.